Good morning. Welcome us today on Dr. Kim Live. I'm Dr. Kim. I'm president of Autism Marriage. I am married to Nancy. We've been married for 51 years. And today I'm excited to have a special guest, a guy that I've heard about for years, and Troy Peverall. He's a Christian marriage counselor. He helps families and helps men overcome pornography addictions. His daughter-in-law, Megan, is a big part of Autism Marriage on our team. And so, Troy, it's great to meet you, and it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for taking time.
Thank you. It's quite the same. Nice to meet you, and it's good to be here.
So tell people just a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do.
Well, I have traditionally done a lot. It seems like I have my hands in quite a bit all the time. And some of that grew out of just being in church ministry, of which there's so much required in so many programs that you lead. But right now I'm the founder and a counselor at Agape Counseling Associates in the southeastern part of North Carolina. We have several offices. I also do some conference speaking on pornography and leadership and marriage. And I have been a professor at Mount Olive University for about 10 to 15 years, and so have been involved with just the education realm and ordained to ministry still. And we just launched a nonprofit called A Voice of Hope International about 2 months ago. And so that's something else that I'm beginning to do. And some of that is actually inclusive of a radio program similar to yours, but just starting. So that's kind of what I'm doing. Yeah.
That's great. Looks like you don't need anything else added on your plate. You've got a lot going.
Yeah, it's fun.
What's the focus of A Voice of Hope as a nonprofit?
Right now, when it started last year, during 2020, it was an idea that I had 6 months prior to June of last year, and just never followed through with pursuing it. And then one day I just, like a button I hit, and I made a contact, and within an hour's time there were several phone calls taking place behind my phone call that kicked in a radio program that began that very day. And so right now it's just it's a radio program where we have people in, not just professionals, but people who have stories of life transitions through the difficult times that I think can give hope to people, especially during this time of our culture after 2020 and just so much of the political unrest that we've had. And so right now it's about bringing in both people who have real stories, as well as those in the field of helping or giving others hope, to really challenge people. That it's called A Voice of Hope on purpose, because I want to see people see that they have a voice just as I have a voice. And so the ministry is going to surround the issue of helping people see that they need to find that voice, whatever walks of life they have, to be that voice.
That is awesome. And I think today, especially so many people that were isolated for so long, to hear stories of hope, of what has happened, how people can, it's so encouraging and helpful for people, because sometimes I think they just don't have that. And I love that.
That's right.
So the podcast is called A Voice of Hope, and people can just find that by just anywhere podcasts are.
I think it actually is on the iCloud, Spotify. You can go to our website, agape-counseling.org, equipmendencourage.org. Our website for A Voice of Hope is actually being built right now. It's that new. So it's, you can find us out there.
That's great. Well, I'm glad to have you today. We're going to take kind of a deep dive into porn, the addiction of it, what it does to families, what it does to marriages. We're looking at some statistics that Barna put out, which I guess this is the largest study they've ever done, that there are over 40 million Americans are regular visitors to porn sites, and the average visits last 6 minutes and 29 seconds. Does that make sense with what you're seeing and what you're hearing in your practice?
It is. When I first started, I do a workshop around Virginia, North Carolina, called Pornography's Prey. And so much of the beginning and building of that workshop had to do with just diving into the statistics that that do change, and you also have learned that stats need to be updated every so often. So when I first
Right.
started, most of the stats were coming around 2007, and it's continued to climb in that way. So I keep my eye on it, but I always have to go back to what's the latest. But the numbers that you're given are pretty consistent with what I see as far as the accessibility and the frequency of accessing pornography.
Yeah. So 47% of the families that reported pornography a problem in their home. If somebody's listening right now and they're struggling with porn, what would you say to them?
One thing I was thinking about, because the church has finally really started to address this more than I think they did when I first started in this subject matter. I would just say to those listening, even now, because the internet can be accessed by anyone, is just to use your judgment for any children that might be listening. But just the church addressing the issue has been something that I have long awaited to see happen. But for those that, I think if you find yourself in that battle, I would say one thing is to know that while it feels so bad and so shameful, that the beginning of finding freedom from it is to be able to talk about it. I use a model in counseling that I created called disclosure, exposure, and composure. And so I walk people through the whole idea that, most people that I see that come in for this issue, the information has been disclosed, but a lot of time it's not coming out of their choice for disclosing, but it has come consequentially. And you want to kind of reverse that to where the person begins to talk about it and disclose that, not to everyone, but to perhaps just a select few, but to have that place where you kind of break the shame cycle, because pornography grows in the dark. And so you want to take it out of that dark, isolated place, as difficult as it is, because I think that's the first step to beginning to find freedom in it. So to talk about it, to find someone that you trust that you can talk to.
So somebody's sitting out there and they're thinking, I don't know who to go to. What options would you say? You're counseling someone, they say that sounds like a great idea, but besides you, I don't have anybody else to go to. Where can they go?
You mean outside of professional counseling?
Yes.
I think, this is the part where, if you look at the stats for pastors, from what I have seen for, pastors struggling with pornography, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of difference with the Christian population who also struggle with it. And so I think there's this reservation that we can have because I struggle with something. I can't go there. And I don't know that this is the only reason. I know it's not the only reason, but a lot of pastors don't necessarily invite that struggle into, hey, come, I'm an available place for you to talk to. But I think it needs to be within churches as well as within pastors to have kind of, this place where, whatever the sin or whatever the struggle, to be a place where people can come to and try to model that. So I think inside of, church life, pastors, leaders, perhaps small group leaders that you might be a part of, trusted friends, are a place, it doesn't mean that you have to spill all, but you just open that conversation. Hey, I'm struggling with an issue and it's hurting me. And I think that's the step of sacrifice that I think begins to kill something that has run rampant for a lot of people.
Yeah, I so agree with that. I think there's something about just verbalizing it and getting out of our head and out there and beginning to talk about it that's just so therapeutic. Well, I think God wired us that way. We're wired to come alongside each other. And so I think what you said, just someone listening, to take that first step. It may seem small to you, but that's going to be a step in the right direction.
It is. Dr. Kim, I was thinking about a verse last week or a couple weeks ago. It says, you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. And I never really had looked at that verse to see that is a future tense verse. Like it's saying you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. So I think at some point in our life, whatever we're struggling with, it's like we lose this sight of what is the truth that about this issue as how God sees it in my life, about how, I'm struggling here. And I think that this, executing the truth just to begin that process is sometimes on us to say, I'm going to sacrifice my fears and I'm going to take a step to push this button of knowing truth in my life again by getting rid of or at least addressing this issue.
I can't think of any man that I've worked with that struggled with this problem that has regretted taking that step after they took it.
Yeah.
As hard as it is sometimes to take that step, but that it's a step toward freedom, it's a step in the right direction. What about, let's turn around. So we've got some, and it could be men or women right now today listening, that the one that's struggling with pornography is their spouse. They know it, they know they're struggling. What would you say to them?
This is tough. So, quite often I'll see if it's a man who's struggling with pornography and it's either discovered and versus disclosed from that person, it brings such a traumatic experience for their wife. And there's a real issue there that now is going to have to be addressed, and many issues for the wife as well, because often the wife might feel like, I caused this. I'm not enough for him, and it gives this traumatic, response of fear and abandonment and like disloyalty and like the feeling of being cheated on. And so I say to that spouse that you're hurting too now for something that you didn't know. But yeah, here's the thing. As difficult as this is going to be, the freedom for you and for your husband in this is to begin to address this. And as Jesus asked Peter to hold on to your faith, because you're going to need this right now. And that faith is not in what you're seeing. It's believing in what you can't see yet. And so the hope that lies before you is that there's going to be freedom in this. In that this was revealed or discovered is what was needed for there to be freedom, whether or not you knew this was existing or not, because it was existing. And so what has happened, as difficult as this is, it's now exposed, which is what's needed for victory. And so the spouse needs to hold on to that, although the feeling of it is god awful terrible for so many women. It also, there's an unfairness in the process that a woman might feel in this, because it's like her world has been, in a sense, ripped apart, and she now is beginning to have to look at insecurities in herself that she didn't ask for, but they came to surface with this issue.
Yeah, I think I've had so many women say to me, why does he look at that when he has me? And I think it becomes a very personal thing for a woman. And I don't think men usually see it that way. It's, to me, it's just sin for men. But for a woman, I think it hits them at a very deep place as they work through that. And, trying to help them see it's not you, it's the problem that your husband has.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to really help them understand, but it is true. I mean, when you look at the science behind, the addictive process, you realize that through this is that while this is, yes, it's going to be defeated through morality and spiritual issues and fighting, that an addiction like this grows physiologically as well. And so I have met maybe one person in 20 some years of counseling that I can recall that had no shame in the sense of true guilt, not false guilt, which would be shame, but true guilt of the issue. Every man that I've met with, they don't want this in their life, but it reached a point where they lost control of it. And so that being said, it doesn't make it necessarily easier for the wife, but I think it helps to separate that this has reached a point when it comes to addiction that, yes, we had at the beginning a choice, as in James chapter 1 teaches, but at some point it progresses down this path of losing control. And so if that person is no longer in control, the fight now becomes a revelation of how is this going to regain a place of control
Mm.
in the good way. And the wife is going to have to walk that road even though she didn't ask for it.
Yeah, I think it's right. I know it doesn't seem fair to wives, and yet when they can accept that this is where I am right now, I think that's their step toward beginning to heal and work through things too.
Yeah.
So obviously, you and I were talking about before we went live about how you've seen and I've seen pornography grow over the years from to where it is today and where it is in our society. And it's almost like it seems like it's almost culturally accepted now. Do you see that?
I think it's becoming, yes, I think it's accepted, but it's so interesting because while it's accepted, those that struggle with pornography, if you take them into another place and really know them as a person, not the person they might come off as being perceived of accepting it. Those people, those same people, really do behind the scenes and in their own life regret that it's there. And so while I
Yeah,
think it's accepted, it's not really accepted inside of a lot of those same people.
I agree. And I think sometimes it's, I think almost the media sometimes wants to make it acceptable. We see that in
Right.
a TV show, and oh, he does porn, and so everybody laughs as he goes in his room or whatever like that. And yet, I don't see that happen in real life. I think sometimes it's just the culture wants us to believe it's okay and it's harmless and all that kind of stuff. But I agree with you. I think you mentioned the church is a place to go. I think there's so much, I guess, shame around it. The church just wasn't very good at addressing that for a long time, and some churches still aren't. That it's kind of this shameful sin, I guess, or shameful thing that we just have not talked a lot about.
I would agree. I mean, if back when I was growing up, probably I don't ever remember a quote sermon, so to speak, about sex. And
Yeah,
yet God created sex, and so the church was not good talking about something that God created, and what we called intimacy. What we really meant was private, and yet
yeah,
so therefore we never talked about God's bigger plan here of something that He created. And so as a result of that, and I think parents really are the first place
mm,
of this needing to happen. And I think the church took a back seat to that. But if that's, at some point, I think we're at that beyond that point, really, the church is not to do the parents' job. But at the same time, the church is going to have to love people and love children. And that means sometimes stepping in where there's a void. And so I think the church should be there to assist in the process of sex as God created it. The reason is because sex is not intimacy. And therefore, the acts of sex, pornography, as to what a child might view, is not intimacy either. But what their brain is beginning to think at some point is that's what intimacy is, and that's what they
yeah,
want. But it's so far removed from intimacy as God designed that we have to re-educate it. I've worked with such young children a few times that what I have to actually do when they have viewed pornography at 6, 7, and 8 years old, and maybe just a couple years older, I've had to go assess first, what do they know about sex? And a lot of times, especially even in Christian home, they're waiting to do that later. But technology has secretly revealed these acts to these same children before their parents knew it. And so it's almost like you got to go back and rewire for the child. And the good thing is this, is that I've actually worked with young boys in helping them in this process with their parents' permission. And it has changed the shame factor that child feels. When I've asked a boy, do you know what you're looking at when you view this picture right here? I don't show the picture, but when
yeah.
you view the issue, and they don't even know the name of things. They don't know what's happening, why it's happening, but they're also wondering, why would I want to be seen? Why do I want to see that? And I think that has to deal with the flesh and not as to what God created, even for a child.
Absolutely. I love everything you said there. I do think, I used to help teach a preparing for adolescence course at a church, and I haven't taught it probably 10 or 12 years, but at that time we geared it toward fifth and sixth graders. And so there we would talk about porn. But to me today, that's almost too late. The parents have got to figure out, and I think there's some great tools. There's some book series out there, I think, that you can start young with kids, where it just begins to help them understand their body, sex, and they, what you said, that we want them to know God has a plan for sex, and that's different than what the world is telling us. And in our marriage, the better our life was together, the better marriage, the better our sex life in marriage. Pornography became just something that was just, it wasn't attractive at all anymore. And I think that's where God wants us to get, where he sees, not that I'm not vulnerable, we're all vulnerable, but
Sure.
where we see that, oh my gosh, this plan that God has is so much better. I mean, it's and different than what the world gives. And this is what I want to embrace, not that.
It's so true. It takes me back to the youth days, and Josh McDowell was a big influence for my wife and I at the time. We were teenagers when we met, but I believe it was him that talked about, or maybe something even I read where he talks about, sex as God created is this thing that's to be cherished inside of a jewelry box that is to never be opened and until it's right time, and only for that time with your spouse. And it's like, that was a childhood lesson that I have always believed, but everything else around this culture, inside my flesh, the sin nature, is just knocking at that little box that's to protect it, is trying to rip it open. And I think that we as men and as children, even for parents to protect them, for churches to help protect them, is to really help them begin to see that what's inside that box is so valuable that you don't want anything but what it's for, because that's the value of it. And so for men who even struggle with pornography, it's like putting this back in the box is not going to just be eliminating pornography from your life. That's going to be one piece of it. But there's so much more, because that's just the pictures and the brain activity of visualization. But there's so much more to intimacy that person is going to be able to put back in the box, that it's going to be life-giving. And it's not just about the acts of sex, it's about intimacy, which is more than the act of sex.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that analogy. I love Josh McDowell too. He had an impact on my life. Also, it's just really, really good. So let's go back to what you made an interesting comment earlier, that the percentage of people in and out of the church, Christian, non-Christian, is not really much different in those who look at porn, that kind of stuff. How do you feel like that has impacted the church? The whole deal of porn and how it's...
I would go again, and I believe what I'm getting ready to say, and I believe it's also grounded in Scripture, is that before God calls a culture back to himself, he calls his people back to himself. And I think, okay, who are the people of God? And so you have the local church, but you have the global church. But I think local churches, meaning its leadership, has really got to come back for themselves first, not for the people that they lead, but for themselves to come back and assess their own purity and lead from that place of purity. And from that place of purity, it should free you up to talk about it, not close your lip from talking about it. So with that, I think churches need to step into this piece. I heard someone say to me recently, well, it's just another sin like all sins. And this was an influential person in a church. And I stepped away from that. I'm going, that's not true. Because the Bible's real clear that sexual sin is like no other sin. Like no other sin. that when a man sins out in any way, it's outside of his body. But when a man sins sexually, it's against his body. And so sin is sin, true, but the effect of it is different. So the church is going to have to say, look, if we're going to affect the culture with this issue, we have to first look at ourselves and begin to affect our own bodies, how we've hurt ourselves in this way. And from that place of purity, begin helping your people know that it is that important to God to have a purity throughout your church that starts at the leadership of your church. So I would ask people in all churches, start praying for your leaders. Pray. When I would say, if somebody asked me, what's the way out in this, spiritually speaking, I would say prayer, but prayer as you've never known it. Prayer at such a more intense way than you've ever had in your life. Because it's like, okay, if the scriptures say that you will, if the Spirit sets you free, you are free indeed. The word to me that stands out there is the word if. So there's a chance here that what do I do about that if factor? And I look at that and I go, I've got to shake the throne of God perhaps over and over and over in my prayer life, saying, God, it's that important to me. When a man or a woman starts to do that, it begins to change the man or the woman, yes, about the pornography or whatever struggle it is, but really changes the person in so many more ways that God's after something bigger than breaking us free from our sin. God is after our hearts. And that prayer process changes our hearts.
And I think, yes. And then I think once that begins to happen, then you can fight the pornography. You can fight these other demons so much better because that's where you are with God at that point. That's so good. I know we got people listening today or watching us and they're saying, yeah, I get what they're saying, but I'm not quite ready to give it up. What are long-term effects of pornography? What does that do to us? And so maybe that would encourage someone to take that step today.
It's quite a bit. I mean, when you look at the research, and again, a lot of the knowledge that I have is coming from just the years of reading and stuff. But, when you see someone struggling with depression, someone struggling with anxiety, someone that may have obsessive compulsive tendencies, someone that is, struggling with loneliness and isolation, it doesn't mean necessarily, quote, they're looking at porn. But these are side effects from looking at pornography. We now know this because of what happens to the brain. And so when you look at this, it's like, okay, perhaps pornography in my life is causing some issues consequentially that I need to address. I think relationships are disturbed by it. And I would also say that it's a spiritual block from someone trying to go deeper, not necessarily because God's causing that block, but because a person naturally thinks that if I'm struggling here to any degree, or if it's not something God would be okay with, I can't know God. And I just think that that's not necessarily true, but it's hard to break that belief. And I would also say probably one of the biggest incentives, and I see this play out. I saw this issue play out before I ever even went into the study in the pornography, which is pornography. Science teaches us that addiction to pornography or any kind of sexual addiction over time can cause erectile dysfunction. And so what young man, because it's starting earlier and earlier, and what middle-aged man and what older man, who would ever say, sign me up for that?
Yeah.
I want to have those. It's like, I don't know any man would want that. And I don't know that any spouse or woman of that man would want that. Because again, God created this for his good purposes. And so pornography addiction can lead to erectile dysfunction. That's the science. That's not just what I think. And there's reasons that research will show you why.
Yeah, it made me think of the one person I have worked with that was in that situation. A lot of pornography all through high school, college, and on his wedding night could not perform. And I think what you're saying is so true. And I think that's one of the consequences. People, you don't hear that very much until, but I think it's definitely real and definitely there. One of the things that I wanted to, we talked a little earlier, and I didn't mention it then, about the accountability thing. Can a wife be your accountability partner?
Yes, there's different views on this. I am not one that says no, she can't. I think it has to do with a couple factors, and that is where's the wife in this picture. I've seen some wives that are supportive. I wouldn't say that they would call themselves the accountability partner, but I think by the nature of marriage can get to the point where you're so connected that you're sharing a struggle now that you're not ashamed of. And so you may have to grow to that point. I wouldn't say that the wife's term is accountability partner, but I think at some point, if you take away the shame of pornography use, it makes total sense why you're no longer ashamed to talk about it. And so the wife is invited into that process, but it doesn't usually happen initially.
I think that makes total sense. One thing I feel like the wives that I've talked to, they want to know, they may not want to know all the details, but they want to know what you're doing to get better. So if you are meeting with someone else or a counselor to kind of give them the feedback, hey, I'm working on this. I think I'm making progress, those kind of things. And I think also for a wife to come alongside and be praying for her husband through this, that she can stand beside him in that.
That's right. So I think,
good. Because you are a team. I mean, you're married. It is the two of you. I mean, it is the husband who's made those choices, but I think the healing comes with both of you having a part in it in some way.
Absolutely. There's support for involvement of the wife in this process, but it has to be respectfully done in consideration for her and where she is as well.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a while ago when you were saying about counseling some kids. So if we've got some parents that are listening and maybe they found out their child has seen some porn at a young age or walked in and the child was looking at something. I had a couple last year that their 11-year-old, all the kids on the soccer team after game were gathered around this one guy. Well, this guy had something on his phone that was inappropriate. He was showing it to everybody else. And most of these kids had never seen something like that in the past. So what does a parent do when they find out that my child has been exposed to porn? All of them can't come to Wilmington to see you. So what do they do?
Well, I was thinking about this myself. The thought that first came to my mind was just so difficult to not do, which is try not to freak out, because when you see this, while it is going to be for most parents, I see so against what they have taught or desired for their kids, but because it can happen, there is just this traumatic response again. And try your best not to freak out. Make sure you get yourself in a healthy place with your spouse, if possible, or with somebody else to be there to support you. And here's the other thing to remember, that while emotions sometimes tell us what we think it tells us the truth about things, we really begin to let our minds go to places that have not happened yet. And fear is always future based. And so here's the thing, if something is hidden in the dark, what's the best thing? For it to come into the light.
Yeah.
And so if something is revealed, even if it's not something you want to see, it's still what God's plan for redemption is to take what is out in the dark and expose it into the light. However that exposure come, while not easy, is the right thing that took place. Now you get to address it. Because look, it could have been you never knew. And that means it's going to grow. This kind of struggle grows in the dark. It doesn't grow in the light. In fact, it'll fade in the light.
So good. So one other thing I wanted to, before we have to go, to have you address, and that is the fact. So the wife, the spouse, found out husband's into porn, all those kind of things. How do they rebuild trust? Because trust has obviously been broken at that point. It's, I think a lot of women, I've had women say he might have well had an affair because of the way she felt or it affected her. How do they rebuild trust?
I think having a plan, it's not a litmus test, but there's a plan that the two of them can come together and say, how are we going to address this?
Mm.
Because you don't want to, the spouse should not step back and go, okay, this is just his struggle. I've seen that happen. And I said, I know, while yes, it's his struggle, because you're married to him, his life affects you, vice versa. And so it's really your struggle together. And so I think that there needs to be yes, an accountability, not from the standpoint of being the accountability partner necessarily, but you need to not have shame that this is a real issue that he needs to address. And so to have that feeling, to have the emotions of anger, to have the emotions of sadness, those are normal, but you can't stay there, but you're going to
Mm.
have to be there initially. And so I think to walk into that and say, we're going to do this together. I can't do this for you, but I'm going to do this with you. And my part is going to be this. And your part needs to look like something, and let him begin to think through how he's going to address this. And if he chooses not to address it, it's kind of like, okay, trust is not going to grow back
Mm.
if there's not trust desired and actions to prove it. And so it's not like he's doing this for her, but he has disrupted the relationship, and trust has to grow at this point. Forgiveness, yes. Healing takes time, and that
Yeah.
healing part is what builds trust.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I maybe think of one lady, yes, that they were working on this, and I saw a change in her. I said, it seems like you're making progress and trusting. And she said the most interesting thing. She said, I saw Jesus in him. And she said
That's
that
good.
made all the difference. It wasn't, I saw Jesus was doing this in him. It wasn't him trying to do it himself. And I thought, yeah, that makes total sense. That is something you can hold on to when you see that.
This is so good and handled well through prayer, especially. I've seen couples begin to address this issue in such a healthy way that the freedom and the victory that they both feel is incredible. At some point, there's a transition for the spouse, and it's similar to what I think you just said, is that you've got to begin at some point to believe in this man for the man he wants to be,
Mm.
not for the man that his actions seem to show, because he doesn't want those things in his life either. Again, if he is gripped by addiction and shame, the thing he wants is to be released from it. That's the man that he wants to be. And
Yeah.
so participate with him in that process, and know that, and believe that. I mean, look at how the Lord looks at, if the Lord looked at me only based upon my sin, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
you know, but he made a way to look at me, know you're a creation by God. And that piece right there is what the man needs to and will begin to believe. Because I'm a man of God, I don't really want this in my life. And
Yeah.
so how can the spouse help to facilitate that drive right there?
Well, I think sometimes women don't realize how powerful their support, their words are with their husband, and especially in this, and in a positive way. And the other side of the negative things of, you're never going to get out of this. You're looking at it again. Those aren't helping him. You want to continue to speak into him and trust. Really, it's trusting God with the changes that your husband is that God wants him to make.
And
Yeah, that's,
I will say, Dr. Kim, in fairness to the wives that struggle, that when a man has been discovered and there isn't change, if a man has disclosed the issue, he's already crossed the threshold of beginning change. For
mhm.
most men, this issue is discovered, and that's a little scary, because he's going to have to switch that. But if a man does not walk down that path of change, and he throws his hands up and he says, I've changed, but yet there's really no fruit from it, then you really probably still have what you had. And so, in fairness to the wife who's struggling in that way, how she supports her husband during that, when the change is not being made,
Mm.
looks a little different than when the changes are beginning to be made. And so, for that, I would say that the path to healing is a little different, and especially for the spouse that struggles with the fact that her husband, in this case,
Yeah.
is not making change.
So the guy that's listening, we're talking because the guys today, anyway, pretty much. that's listening today and says, okay, I want to become clean, would you recommend that he goes and tells his wife as opposed to her finally figuring it out?
First of all, I would just say I can't make that decision for them because I am not, I think that I don't know that the people who are
Sure.
listening, I don't know their life story. And so I can't blanket that with, yes, they should do that. But I would say that revelation of your struggle needs to happen somewhere and somehow. And it needs to be, I think the best thing is not to have it with the same sex driven person. Like if you're driven towards, females, hopefully if you're a man, but if you're not, you don't want to reveal that struggle with somebody that actually could become a struggle for you because you're letting them into an intimate part of your soul. And so whoever that right person is, I think revelation of your struggle needs to take place.
I agree completely.
And,
I think.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's so good. Kind of coming to an end. What would your final thoughts or final counsel be as we wrap this up today?
There's hope. There's always hope.
Yeah.
I think as much of a struggle that this issue causes people to feel, as well as the one that struggles and the spouse of one who struggles, there is hope. Hope is never lost. The question sometimes that is asked, is there a point of no return? And I think that, I don't believe there is. I believe that we are called to always believe and always hope and to believe for something bigger and better. I think that our faith takes us there. If we saw in someone's life that it never happened and they left this earth and we concluded that they reached a point of no return, that's never in our place to call that. That's only in God's place. So while now I think we're called to know that God gives us an out and there is hope and we can walk through that door, we have to just be willing to begin to do that.
Amen. That's so good. So if people want to find out more about you, where's the best place for them to do that?
They can go to agape-counseling.org. And that's our website here at our practice. Just
and the new nonprofit, will it be a voiceofhope.org at the new website?
We are still looking for that. We were given a hefty price to have that name, and so we're just like, we're not sure yet, but we're looking for different. We're in the process of picking the website's name. We have again, we're so new at this. I think we've actually been official with the government maybe for less than 2 months. So.
Yeah, just getting into it. Yeah, we ended up having to purchase who would have thought somebody had awesomemarriage.com, but they did. So we had to do the same thing and go through that.
Well, I got the price tag this morning actually, and I'm like, what? So
I know.
We'll see.
I know. I have a friend that just thinks up and buys website names all the time, and I guess eventually he'll make some money off of some of them because he's probably got a lot of them that people would want.
Yeah.
It's been great having you today. It's great to spend time with you. Thanks for taking time to join us today.
Absolutely. Dr. Kim, we'd love to have you on A Voice of Hope. Would you be so kind to do that at some point?
Absolutely. I would love to do that and hope that we can do this again sometime soon. Very much so.
We shall. Thank you so much for considering me and having me on.
Thank you. Thanks for all you guys who are listening. Next week, we're going to talk about premarital counseling, why counseling is important before you say I do. You guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.